Most people think success comes from hard work. But if that were true, far more people would be successful. The reality is that many people spend years repeating the same mistakes, facing the same problems, and wondering why nothing changes. Not because they're lazy, not because they're unintelligent, but because they're unknowingly violating a few invisible laws that shape almost every outcome in life. Laws that influence how you solve problems, make decisions, build relationships, and respond to setbacks. Today, we're going to explore 5 of those laws. And the last one may reveal why some of the biggest problems in your life were never actually the problems at all. Most people think they're dealing with different problems: a money problem, a relationship problem, a career problem, but what if they're all connected? Think about how many times you've promised yourself things would change. Yet months later, you find yourself facing the same frustration in a different form. Different situation, different people, the same result. After a while, it starts to feel like bad luck, but it isn't. What traps most people isn't a lack of effort. It's a failure to recognize the hidden patterns shaping their decisions. And the first of those patterns begins with a law that explains why things so often go wrong when you least expect it. The first law is Murphy's Law. It states that anything that can go wrong will eventually go wrong. Most people hear that and assume it's a pessimistic view of life. It's not. Think about the last time you planned something important: a presentation, a trip, a major opportunity. Everything seemed under control until one small thing failed. The file wouldn't open. The traffic was worse than expected. The message never got delivered. And suddenly, the entire plan started falling apart. The mistake wasn't the failure itself. The mistake was assuming failure wasn't part of the plan. Successful people don't expect perfection. They expect friction. They assume mistakes will happen, delays will occur, and unexpected problems will appear. Because of that, they prepare differently. They build backups. They leave margin for error. They create systems that survive mistakes. Murphy's Law isn't teaching you to be negative. It's teaching you to be realistic. And strangely enough, the people who prepare for problems are usually the ones least damaged by them. But recognizing problems is only half the battle. The next law explains why clearly defining a problem often makes it dramatically easier to solve. Have you ever spent weeks trying to solve a problem, only to realize you never fully understood the problem in the first place? Most people have. They say they're stressed, unmotivated, stuck. But those aren't actually problems, they're symptoms. And that's where people get trapped. They spend months chasing motivation when the real issue is fear. They blame stress when the real issue is uncertainty. They keep searching for answers without first asking the right question. As a result, nothing changes, not because the solution is impossible, but because the target is unclear. That's the idea behind Kydland's Law. If you can clearly define a problem, you've already done half the work required to solve it, because clarity changes the way your brain responds. A vague problem feels overwhelming. A specific problem feels manageable. The moment you can describe exactly what's wrong, the confusion begins to disappear. And once confusion disappears, progress becomes possible. But here's where things get interesting. Many people know exactly what the problem is. They just can't decide what to do about it. And that hesitation often causes more damage than the problem itself. The next law explains why. The third law changes how most people think about success. Wilson's law states that knowledge and intelligence compound into long-term results. In simple terms, what you know eventually becomes what you earn. Most people ignore this. They chase money directly. Quick income, fast opportunity, short-term wins. But the problem is, money without skill doesn't last. Think about 2 people. One focuses on earning as much as possible right now, without improving their abilities. The other focuses on building skills that solve valuable problems. At first, the first person may look more successful, more income, more activity, more movement. But over time, everything changes because value compounds, skills grow, opportunities expand, and results start following the person who invested in learning, not just earning. That's the core idea behind Wilson's law. If you prioritize knowledge, money becomes a natural outcome of the value you create, not something you chase, but something you attract. And this is where most people make a critical mistake. Even when they understand value, they still rush into decisions too quickly. They react instead of thinking. They choose speed over clarity. And that leads to the next law, which explains why timing your decisions can be just as important as making them. The fourth law challenges how most people handle uncertainty. Falkland's law says, when there is no need to make a decision, don't make one. But this is where most people fail. Uncertainty feels uncomfortable, so they rush. They choose too early just to escape doubt. They invest before understanding. They commit before thinking. They react before seeing the full picture. And later, they realize the mistake wasn't inactivity. It was unnecessary action, because not every situation improves with speed. Some improve with time. More information appears. Emotions settle. Better options show up. That's why patience is a form of strategy, not delay. But even this isn't enough, because even when you wait, think clearly, and make better choices, you can still end up misunderstood, still end up misaligned, still end up solving the wrong problem. And that happens more often than people realize. The next law explains why communication itself is often the hidden failure point. The fifth law reveals a problem most people never notice in real life. Gilbert's law states, the biggest communication problem is the assumption that communication has already happened. In other words, people believe they are clear when they are not. Think about how often this happens. A manager thinks the team understands the goal. The team thinks the manager is being unclear. A partner assumes the other person knows how they feel. A friend assumes nothing needs to be explained, but no one actually checks. And that gap creates confusion everywhere. People don't argue because they disagree. They argue because they misunderstood each other from the start. And the dangerous part is, both sides feel right. Because intention is invisible, only interpretation remains. That's why small misunderstandings turn into big conflicts, not because people don't care, but because they assume understanding exists without confirming it. And once you see this pattern, you realize something important. Most failures in life are not caused by lack of effort. They're caused by broken communication loops. But this leads to a bigger question. If we misunderstand others this easily, how often are we misunderstanding the entire system we live in? And that final question connects everything together. When you put all 5 laws together, a clear pattern appears. Murphy's law teaches preparation. Kydland's law teaches clarity. Wilson's law teaches value over money. Falkland's law teaches patience. And Gilbert's law teaches communication. Most people fail not because they lack intelligence, but because they skip one of these steps. They react instead of preparing, guessing instead of defining, chasing instead of building, rushing instead of waiting, and assuming instead of confirming. Success is not one big secret. It's the consistent application of simple principles. If this video gave you a new perspective, subscribe for more psychology and human behavior insights.